Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is new international trends, Africa and China, with special emphasis upon Zaire and Nigeria. And we're fortunate to have with us to talk about new international trends in Africa and in China, Dr. LMadu. Dr. LMadu is the president of Pana Africa, and he's the chief of protocol, as well as the chairman of the Nigerian Patriotic Front. And Dr. LMadu, let me welcome you to the show this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. LMadu, I think that we've had you on a number of occasions talking about some of the problems generally associated with the continent of Africa. And I think that in terms of bringing information to us about the continent of Africa, I don't think that we could find a better representative to give us that kind of information this morning than yourself. Let's have you, Dr. LMadu, before we get into the so-called new international trends of Africa and China, with emphasis upon Zaire and Nigeria. Before we get into that as a topic this morning, let's have you to talk about the organizations that you are affiliated with. More specifically, let's have you to give us some information about the Pan Africa, the organization in which you are the president, and some information about the chief of protocol, as well as the chairman of the Nigerian Patriotic Front. So give us that kind of information, and then we'll talk about new.
Yes, thank you. Pan Africa is an international organization that caters to fostering improved relationship between the United States and Africa. In addition, it also has programs, dealing with African diplomats and dignitaries visiting various parts of the United States. We have development projects in various African countries, specifically Swaziland, Malawi, etc., etc. And also it helps coalesce African interests and build a constituency for African interests in the United States. As you know, Africa, since the end of the so-called Cold War, has been marginalized internationally. And people don't seem to care more about the continent.
When you say marginalized internationally, what are you saying, Dr. LMadu?
Well, because during the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union, unquote, at that particular time, used Africa as a battleground, used most African countries and armies as their proxies. Wherever the Americans were, the Russians, countered with another country. Wherever the Russians were, the Americans did the same. For example, Somalia and Ethiopia. They were getting billions of dollars in arms from both sides, to fight their wars and little economic aid. So since the Cold War ended, and there's no more international competition, so to speak, between the so-called, Soviet Union before and the United States, then most African countries do not receive any more attention from these countries. So people tend to forget there's a continent, like Africa. So Pan Africa is one of those organizations that tries to sensitize, the public and also build a constituency. In addition to that, I personally arrange, for taking care of visiting dignitaries when they come here, ambassadors and prime ministers, etc., etc., as part of making sure, all the protocols are observed, in international diplomacy. Well, with the Patriotic Front of Nigeria, about the problems facing the government and the people of Nigeria since the last elections in June of 1993. The Patriotic Front is one of those organizations that not only supports the territorial integrity of Nigeria, but also promotes the economic and political agenda, of the country. As you know, we've been having problems since those elections were held, and Nigeria has been under intense international, pressure and condemnation. And the country has to have people who can stand up and say, we are proud to serve and help the country.
Dr. LMadu, I think that when we talk about new international trends dealing with China and Africa, I think the first question might be, before you get into China and into Africa, dealing specifically with Zaire and Nigeria, Let's talk about your conception of these new international trends. What do you see as as some of the new international trends? As a diplomat, as a person who has been involved in protocol for the longest, what do you see as some of the new international trends on the horizon?
Well, I think apart from, I would say the 1970s and 80s were periods of political, machinations in the international level. I would say the decade of the 90s is that of economic development, empowerment, and hegemony. Mm-hmm. Since the Cold War ended, the focus of international realignment, has focused on economic terms. The Group of Seven. Mm-hmm. I have the Southeast Asian Economic Group. You have the African, Economic Group. You have the NAFTA and all these. You have increased trade between the United States and Russia now. You have Japan trying to ally with, Singapore and the rest in Asia, and China emerging as one big market. Mm-hmm. So that's the new trend now. The new trend is, economic alignments and realignments. The political issues we have fought out in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and with the demise of the Soviet Union, the political tension, internationally has decreased. So the focus now becomes, economic. Mm-hmm. I think that's where we're heading into the, 2001.
Well, then let us look at the new trends as they have an impact or as they affect these areas that we've already talked about. Now, how do you see, first of all, let's deal with China. I think that it would be appropriate to deal with China and to sort of, after we deal with China, to devote the remaining part of the program to Africa, dealing with those specific areas. Mm-hmm. But how do you see the situation between the United States and China not only in the United States and the rest of the world? Mm-hmm. Let's talk about it from that perspective.
Well, you see, since 1972, when President Nixon, visited China and met, with Mao Zedong and all other Chinese leaders, that established, an American-Chinese rapprochement, even though the United States still, did not recognize China at that time. If you will remember, Taiwan still had, a seat at the United Nations, instead of, mainland China, as it's called. It wasn't until after the trip of Deng Xiaoping, to the United States, and during the Carter presidency, that we formally recognized the People's Republic of China as the legitimate, and sole representative of the Chinese people. Prior to that time, that title belonged to, Taiwan, which is also called Nationalist China. And you know how Taiwan came into being. It was after Chiang Kai-shek was defeated by Mao Zedong's communist armies that he fled across the Straits of Taiwan, which was also called Formosa, with his army and followers, and established a rival government in Taiwan, which the United States recognized as the sole legitimate government until the 1970s, when under Carter's presidency, we recognized, the People's Republic of China as the legitimate government of China, until the death of Mao Zedong in 1976, and also Zhou Enlai. China and its economy, we are very backwards. And if you remember the Cultural Revolution, the Cultural Revolution was, in fact, a reaction by followers of Mao Zedong against the proponents of an open-door capitalist, economy favored by Deng Xiaoping and Liu Xiaoji. So the Cultural Revolution was an attempt to crush Mao's opponents who insisted on economic changes. Mao's policy was politics first, economics second.
Good. And let me interrupt you, Dr. Madu. We're coming up to our first commercial break, and after which we'll then come back and pick up at this particular point. And we'll be back with you following this short commercial break.